Here I will discuss the 10 basic sentence patterns and hopefully help you understand how to diagram these patterns and an easy way to memorize the patterns. Let's get started on the 10 basic sentence patterns and diagramming those sentences. The first thing you have to do is determine the main line of the sentence. The main line includes the simple subject and the verb of the sentence. The most important thing that I do in order to determine the sentence pattern is I identify the verb and what type of verb is in the sentence. If you look closely at the sentence patterns, you can group them by the type of verb within the sentence. Look at the first three sentence patterns. They all have the be-verb. The next two have linking verbs. The next one, pattern number 6, stands alone with an intransitive verb. And the last four have transitive verbs, which we'll get into the difference between intransitive and transitive verbs later on in this presentation. In order to remember these patterns, I found a pattern within the pattern. I know it sounds confusing, but it's pretty simple once you have this pattern down. All the patterns begin with the subject. Move on to the verb, which we need to identify the type of verb in order to know where we fall within the various patterns. And then move on to the expression of the idea. This is where memorization has to come into play. Now, notice that patterns 1 through 3 contain the be-verb, then an adverb here, an adjective here, and a noun here. Then patterns 4 and 5 contain linking verbs with an adjective here and a noun here. Pattern 6 stands alone without anything following the verb, which makes it an intransitive verb. Then patterns 7 through 10 all contain transitive verbs, but have you noticed the pattern within the patterns yet? Beginning at pattern 2, the patterns alternate from adjective to noun, which is repeated twice. Then nothing, that's how I remember the intransitive verb, because nothing follows. And then adjective to noun repeated again at 9 and 10. Now, 7 and 8 are abnormal, but you can think of a way to remember these. I just remember that pattern 6 has nothing, but 7 begins the direct object, and patterns 8, 9, and 10 build off pattern 7. Pattern 8 has the subject, transitive verb, and direct object, but the indirect object has been added. Pattern 9 has a subject, transitive verb, and direct object, but instead of an indirect object, we begin the adjective noun sequence again. First, let's look at patterns 1 through 3. These patterns all contain a subject and be-verb. The be-verb is some form of the verb be. Am, is, are, was, were, been, and been is used as the main verb. Be can also be used as a helping verb. But to qualify for one of these three patterns, the be form must come last in the verb phrase. Look at this example. She must be going to church. Be serves as a helping verb because the final word in the verb phrase is going, an action verb. Her church must be nearby. Now in this sentence, be is the final word in the verb phrase, and the sentence contains a be verb. Let's move our focus to the end of each of the sentence patterns. Pattern number 1 ends with adverb, time, or place. There are 6 questions that an adverb can answer: when, where, why, how, for what purpose, and under what condition. In the case of pattern number 1, be is followed by an adverb that indicates the time or place in which something or someone exists. He was here. Here is acting as a place where he was. Now, when we diagram sentence number 1, we have a subject followed by a be-verb followed by the adjective time or place, and the adjective time or place is always going to be diagrammed under the be-verb. And this sentence, was is the be-verb, he is the subject, and here is the adjective, or the adverb time or place, I'm sorry. Now let's look at this example. He was in the car. In the car is a prepositional phrase that is explaining where he was. So the prepositional phrase, the entire prepositional phrase, is describing where. Therefore, it's the adverb time or place. So was is going to be diagrammed where. The be verb would be he is the subject, and in the car has to be diagrammed under the verb because it is explaining where he was. So it's modifying the verb itself. Pattern number 2 contains the subject, be, verb, and adjective. When we diagram pattern number 2, notice that the main line has the straight up and down divider between the subject and be, and there's a slanted line between the adjective and the be verb. This is due to the adjective being a complement to the subject. And what that means is it's the dog is excited. What's excited? The dog is excited. So the action is towards the dog. The excitement is towards the dog. So it's referring back. It's complimenting. And when we diagram pattern number 2, notice that is a be verb. It's a form of the be verb. Dog is the subject, so it goes in the first spot there. And excited is the adjective. And then the tells us which dog. So the is going to be diagrammed under dog. Pattern number 3 contains the subject, be, verb, and noun. When we diagram pattern number 3, we'd have the subject and the be, verb, and the noun all in the main line with the slanted line back towards the subject because the noun is actually going to rename the subject, which in this case it complements the subject. For example, in this sentence, the dog is a family member. Is the be verb. Dog is the subject. And member refers back and renames the dog. What is the dog? The dog is a member. Now, the complements the dog. I'm sorry. It's saying which dog. And then A and family both complement member. A is telling us how many. And then family is telling us which one, which member, family member. Pattern number 4, patterns number 4 and 5, I'm sorry, consist of, pattern number 4 consists of a subject, a linking verb, and an adjective, and pattern 5 consists of a subject, a linking verb, and a noun. You can identify a linking verb by replacing the verb with some form of the be-verb, and the sentence still makes sense. She seems fond of her brother. We can replace seems with is. Once we determine that the verb is a linking verb, we just have to figure out if the sentence ends with an adjective or a noun to determine which pattern the sentence falls under, 4 or 5. And just like in the patterns number 2 and 3, there's going to be a slanted line back because fond is complimenting she. And because fond is explaining what or how, that's making the fond is an adjective. Now, of her brother is a prepositional phrase that is telling us who she is fond of. So therefore, the prepositional phrase telling us who becomes an adjective in itself. The whole thing is an adjective that is explaining fond. So therefore, it's diagrammed under fond. Now, pattern number 6, which is a subject and transitive verb. Pattern number 6 stands alone and consists of a subject and an intransitive verb. This is the only pattern with an intransitive verb. An intransitive verb is an action verb where there is no object receiving the action. The man jumped. And this jumped is not receiving any type of or there is nothing receiving the action of jumped. The man jumped. There's nothing telling us where or anything like that. It's just saying the man jumped. And we can understand what that sentence means. The man jumped. If they tell you the man jumped, you understand what that means. There's nothing that has to follow. Now, the man jumped into the car, for example, there is still nothing that receives the action on this. Some may think that the car is receiving the action, but that's not what's going on here. The man jumped. He jumped where? He jumped into the car. So, into the car is a prepositional phrase that is telling us where. So, it's acting as an adverb here. Therefore, into the car is going to be diagrammed underneath jumped. Patterns 7 through 10 all contain a transitive verb. A transitive verb is an action verb that has an object receiving the action of the verb. Now notice a difference. The intransitive verb has no object receiving the action. The transitive verb has an object receiving the action. In pattern 7, there's a subject, a transitive verb, and a direct object. A direct object answers whom or what after a verb. The Indian swung the hatchet. The Indian swung what? The hatchet. Oh, sorry. And right here, I'm just showing you how to diagram the sentence pattern number 7. Notice that there is a straight line between the transitive verb and the direct object because the direct object does not complement the subject. Therefore, we want a straight line between the direct object and the transitive verb. The cool thing about diagramming is once you figure out the patterns and the pattern of the diagram itself, it never changes. All you have to do is add your words that complement each other underneath or on top on pedestals. Now, the Indian swung the hatchet. Swung is an action verb that is followed by a transitive verb because the hatchet tells us swung what? Swung the hatchet. Therefore, the hatchet is the direct object. Now, the and the here, in this case, just complement the Indian and the hatchet. They tell us which one, the hatchet. Pattern number 8 contains a subject, a transitive verb, an indirect object, and a direct object. And the diagram of this sentence pattern looks like this. Notice that the indirect object is always underneath the transitive verb itself. Now, an indirect object answers one of the 6 questions. It answers to whom, for whom, of whom, to what, for what, and of what. The Indian gave the captain his hatchet. The Indian gave what? The hatchet. So hatchet is the direct object. But he gave the hatchet to whom? Captain. So captain is the indirect object. Here, I'm just showing you that gave is an action verb. Therefore, an action verb followed by an object receiving the action, telling us what. So he gave what? The hatchet. Therefore, it's a transitive verb. And then here we're just filling in the what are all of the adjectives. On pattern number 9, which is a subject, transitive verb, direct object, and adjective, we would diagram like this with the this is the main line. So you would have your subject followed by the transitive verb with the direct object, and then the adjective at the end, which is complementing the direct object this time, not the subject, the direct object. So the adjective complements the direct object, therefore the line has to be slanted back, referring back to the direct object. Now, when we consider the example, the captain considered the Indian crazy. Considered is an action verb. And what's the subject of the sentence? The subject of the sentence is captain. And the captain considered whom? The Indian. So therefore, Indian is the direct object. And he considered the Indian. Which Indian? The crazy Indian. So therefore, because it's answering the question which one, it is an adjective. Now, notice that we can answer to be in this in between Indian and crazy, and the sentence still functions in the same manner. So the captain considered the Indian to be crazy. That's how we can determine patterns 9 and 10, and you'll see that again here in pattern 10. Pattern 10 contains the subject, transitive verb, direct object, and the noun. The captain considered the Indian a lunatic. When we diagram this just like the diagram for pattern number 9, except for instead of adjective at the end, it's a noun that's complementing the direct object. It's basically renaming the direct object. Notice that I draw the main line first because the main line is never going to change as long as you can figure out the pattern. Notice considered is an action verb that is followed by a direct object. So we know that we fall somewhere between 7 and 10. All we have to do is figure out where at within 7 and 10 that we fall. Now we know that it's receiving, or there's a direct object, and then the direct object is being renamed by lunatic. So therefore, lunatic becomes the noun that is complementing Indian. And notice again that we can add to be between Indian and a. The captain considered the Indian to be a lunatic. So that's a little tip for figuring out 9 and 10, which they're not very common. And that concludes this presentation for diagramming, and I hope that this helps you mainly memorize. I really wanted to put this together to help people memorize because I saw the patterns, and I thought it was pretty clever that there was a pattern within the pattern, and if you can figure that out, you shouldn't have any problem memorizing the patterns. Thank you for taking the time out to watch this. That concludes this presentation.